And to truly deliver the electric revolution that we all want to see, it has to be something that is affordable one way or another for everybody. Because if it isn't, then it's socially divisive. And if there's one thing the combustion car has been brilliant at doing, it's been in liberating people, giving them social freedom, the ability to travel for work, the ability for recreation, for lots of things. If we cannot bring that to the masses, then it won't work. Now, part of this might be, I think will be actually, the arrival of ubiquitous, relatively inexpensive, autonomous vehicles.
Welcome to another podcast episode for the Electric Vehicle Innovation Summit, or EVIS. I am Joseph Alcantara, the head of marketing for this event-changing platform that we are building in the Middle East and in America and global markets as well. This afternoon, I'm joined by Roger Atkins. He is the founder of Electric Vehicle Outlook Ltd and the advisory board chair for EVIS EMG, both in Abu Dhabi and in America. Roger has actually spent decades across the automotive world and more than 20 years really very close to the EV transition, connecting innovators, inventors, policymakers, OEMs, and infrastructure leaders to turn momentum into measurable progress. Today's conversation is about a very important topic that matters not just to the industry, but also to the regular consumers who will be embracing the products of EV. It's all about understanding where EV strategies fail and what we can do to do things differently. Welcome to the pod, Roger.
Joseph, thank you. That was quite some introduction. I don't know whether that makes me sound well-informed or simply old, but that's fine. It's fine either way. Yeah.
You are very seasoned, Roger, and I'm looking forward to this conversation because I'll be learning a lot from you as an industry expert, and I'm sure that a lot of people who will be listening to us today will be able to experience the same. So my first question to you, just to level set everything, with everything that has happened in the development of the EV technology, the rollout of it, how people are embracing it locally, regionally, and globally, at what stage are we in? Are we at the beginning phase? Are we already at the development phase? Or is it a mature market? Are there still a lot of paths and steps to get into to eventually really say that we are fully developed EV-wise?
Well, now, isn't that a question? Yeah, to start off with. Well, I think the simple answer is we're well on the way, but in truth, it depends where you are as to how far down the track we are. The technology is pretty mature, but it's not there yet fully. But what do I mean by that? Well, I think there are options, which we'll probably talk about in a moment, around how charging works. Because at the moment, charging just looks like the same as when you fill a car up with gas. You know, you plug something in, you put in the energy and you take it out and you walk away again. So that I think is going to change. I've thought that for some time. We'll probably talk about that. In terms of adoption rates, again, it depends where you are in the world very much because, of course, this wasn't from the same starting point all over the world. And what do I mean by that? It means that if you look at car ownership, in different countries, it's incredibly variable. And there are statistics, there's one in particular, a metric called car ownership per thousand of the population. So it basically says just that. And if you look at America, it's something like 850 or more. Out of 1,000 people own a car, and a lot of people have two cars. A lot of families are 2 or 3, 4-car families. But then if you look at other developing countries or countries that are relatively new to many of the things going on, even like China, that's hovered around the 150, 200 mark. So there's a lot of difference around the world in terms of it isn't just the car industry is combustion and it's going to change to electric and it's going to be a binary switch. Depends where you are. It depends who you talk to, quite frankly. It depends upon the political landscape. There's no doubt about that. And several other things. So that's what makes it so interesting, Joseph. The fact that it's not straightforward. And again, the shift from a century-old industry, well, it's 140 years, the internal combustion engine. Something that's been around that long was never going to change overnight because it's complex and because you have really embedded systems and organizations and cultures even that have deep-rooted in how how vehicles have always been, which is internal combustion. So that was never going to just change like that by someone clicking their fingers. So look, it's a long answer, but I hope it answered your question.
Yeah, definitely. I think it paints a picture when it
Okay,
comes
good,
to
good.
how it started, where we are, and the long road or the path that we can eventually get into as industry builders for this particular industry. And I think now more than ever, during the recording of this podcast episode, we're technically in the middle of an interesting time, to put it in simple terms. The price of petrol or gas, wherever you are in the world, how you're terming it, is skyrocketing. And what we are seeing right now, not only on households, but also in various industries that are consuming gas, they are seeing that there has to be ways or substitutes or other more efficient approaches when it comes to manufacturing, or how to lower the cost of business or the cost of goods because of the price of oil or gas or petrol, as well as household gasoline in the usual car that we typically use. That's why I was like thinking now more than ever, the relevance of the electric vehicle industry is really on an uptrend. And I think this is something that we should be leveraging. It's a pivotal moment where both the industry creators or players or participants should hold hands and do their part to be able to do the development or the shifts or the progression. What are your thoughts around that, especially during this interesting time, Roger?
Look, let's start at the fundamental. We have oil, we've had oil for a long time, and we're going to have oil for a long time to come. And the reason for that is there are a lot of oil derived products. This isn't just about petrol and diesel or gas or anything to do with mobility necessarily, because oil derived all around us, they're fundamental to how the modern world works. They're in agriculture, they're in chemicals, they're in a lot of materials that we use, they're in plastic. So understanding the dynamics of the oil product, of the oil industry, I think is very important to pick up some of what you said. I think also, yeah, it's always going to be sensitive that the price at the pump is always going to trigger a reaction. Well, when it goes high, for sure. We were here in this similar place 4 years ago. We've been in this place several times, certainly in my living memory. And each time it creates a renewed interest in many things, including being more efficient. There was an era in the 1970s where there was an oil crisis, where the American government then triggered a program where you had a speed limit of 55 miles an hour. I'm not sure it really changed that much for many, many years, because they were trying to manage consumption. They were trying to improve efficiency. Ironically, for many situations that are undeniably bad and challenging, often good things can emerge. You mentioned a renewed interest in EVs as a consequence of current things going on. Yeah, that of course that's a good thing. Sometimes feels uncomfortable and could feel like it as an exploitation of a very bad situation for many, many people. But nonetheless, it is the reality. I think we've got to understand that we're in a managed transition
Yeah.
of mobility and a managed transition of energy. I think to simply say oil is bad is totally simplistic, because we have to have that managed transition over time, and it will take decades, because it's taken over a century to establish what we've got. So like I say again, we can't just click fingers and suddenly we're doing everything that's different. We need to, and the challenges for sure are climatic change, air quality, but they are also now increasingly energy security. They are many things to do with progress. The bottom line in this is that change is a constant, and that's a reality. And it puts me in mind of a very famous quote from Sheikh Yamani, who was a 1970s Saudi oil minister. And he said, bear in mind who he was and where he was, he said this, he said, the Stone Age didn't come to an end because they ran out of stones.
Mm.
And the oil industry won't come to an end because we run out of oil. It's just that something comes along that will be better. And until it's better for each and every country for a number of different reasons, similar reasons, but different, then we're on a journey. So that's certainly how I see it.
That's such a profound and existential, yet very understandable way to put it. And I really appreciate your insight there, Roger. Especially, I'd want to build on something that you said, which is on the managed transition part, because that is really very true right now on the phase where we're in. And the question of a lot of countries or even industries or players is like, how do we do that managed transition stage to scale it in such a way that it becomes mainstream and it becomes profitable across all different sectors, and the adoption will be high for those actual consumers who will eventually be users of the output of EV. So you've watched the EV transition evolve over the last 2 decades or more than 2 decades. So, in your view, what is the biggest misconception leaders still have about what it takes to scale? Because to your point, we're in a path here. It's not going to be a flick of a finger, and there are like a lot of steps to take into account, and majority of these steps are will actually be headed up and will be brought to life by leaders of countries, industries, boards, or regulatory action parties or programs. So the question is like, what are the biggest misconceptions or the failures that you're seeing so far that would have to change?
Well, I think a big one is infrastructure, is that some companies, be they the incumbents, the existing OEMs, or many of the new companies, believe that infrastructure is a job for the government. But we have rarely seen, if anywhere, any real substantial investment by government in charging infrastructure. The charging infrastructure has typically been left to the car makers themselves, the vehicle manufacturers, and startup innovators in and around the charging proposition, other than with the notable exception of Tesla. Tesla is the only electric car proposition that at the same time as bringing out the cars, brought out the charging infrastructure. But everybody else has kind of left it to somebody else. So what have I observed? Well, I observed that there's a gap, basically, an expectation. And that for a lot of people who are, yeah, I think fearful is the word, fearful of, well, where can I charge? What happens if I get low on my range? And that was perfectly understandable for a long time, up until quite recently, when you only had electric vehicles that could do 100 miles or 150 miles or 200 miles, 300 or 400 kilometers. But now batteries are getting cheaper, more efficient, and longer range. So it doesn't mean that the charging challenge has gone away, but it's become easier. It's less a big issue. I think that the misunderstanding or the kind of lack of communication between car makers, governments, and investors in the charging infrastructure is where we've got a problem. It's been organic in some of its growth, but not organic enough. And it's not been particularly targeted or well understood. And it's the absolute illustration of a chicken and egg scenario
Mm.
where it's a bit like, well, how can you spend a lot of money on charging infrastructure if you haven't got a lot of EVs? And you haven't got a lot of EVs because you haven't got a charging infrastructure. So that's where it is. And for a lot of countries, the initial wave of adoption has been with people who can charge at home.
Mm.
So when you can charge at home, which is such a revelation for people. Imagine if you said to all the people with gas cars, petrol or diesel cars, we're going to put a petrol pump on your drive. So you never have to go to the gas station again. You can fill up at home. Someone will do it magically overnight. You don't even have to get your hands dirty. They'd be like, wow, yeah, we'll do that. But of course, that's not the world. That's not practical. It's not what's happening. But for electric vehicles, it is. You plug it in, you walk into your house, you go to sleep, you wake up in the morning, got a full tank of fuel, a full battery. So I think there's been a big disconnect there around the world in almost all markets between what is the charging proposition and what is the electric vehicle proposition.
Love that. That's really very helpful on context as well, Roger, because I love the chicken and egg parallel there, and also the thinking that the infrastructure should be started by the government, but also at the same time, the government already has a lot on their plate to be able to cover, right? So I think
Exactly.
it's a disservice or a misunderstanding across all the key sectors that are part and parcel of the entire ecosystem. So my question here is there a world for us to bridge this gap when it comes to the expectation, to the understanding, who will do one thing first so that the understanding when it comes to the needs of the infrastructure, the understanding of the benefits for the consumers or the households, which will eventually lead to adoption, economies of scale, profitability will eventually be brought to life. I know if there's one clear answer, we wouldn't be having these podcasts or these events right now, but probably just some thought starters who will be part of the event that we are staging and who will be prime movers and change makers in this industry that they should be mindful of these key things that we'll get from your thoughts.
Okay. I often ask myself why people don't do things, not
Mm,
just why they do things. Now, why wouldn't the car industry, the existing industry, want to switch to EVs? Well, the obvious answer is because they don't make them, or they only make a few of them. And some of the big competitor countries, you could argue, like China, are already doing it and doing it very well. Well, one of the reasons I'm pretty certain is that they don't know how to make money out of it. They don't know what the business model is. Now, the business model for making and selling cars has been well understood for, like I say, 100 years or more. You make a car, it costs X, you make it at scale. You can then have the economies of scale to build and sell vehicles profitably. But in addition, you then have recurring revenues because you have after sales, you have service support, you have parts, friction parts, lubricants, belts, chains, timing, all sorts of things. Now, I suspect that one of the reasons why the existing industry, what we call the incumbents, haven't been so keen to adopt the electric vehicle is because they don't understand what's the business model going to be. Where are those recurring revenues? And they're still kind of, I can tell you what they are, by the way, but they're still kind of new and evolving, but quickly. So what are they? They are energy, the electrons instead of the hydrocarbons. They are software, which is software updates, added features, etc. That's already happening with some people already going on that journey. And you could argue there's a third one potentially, which is data.
mm,
So once OEMs think and their investors can start to understand what is this electric vehicle business model? Because the electric vehicle's understood what it is, its bill of materials, its comparison to a combustion car. Yeah, we get that. But what we don't get is how do you make money? How do you make money? Making them, selling them, looking after them. And that's important to customers too, because I don't want someone to make something for me and then they're not there in a year, 2 years, 5 years time. When I need some parts, I need a new front body because I bashed it against a wall on the drive or, all sorts of things. So I think profitability is at the heart of this. I think the existing industry is fearful that they can't and won't make money out of the electric vehicle. Go back to Tesla. I think this isn't a Tesla commercial, by the way. We're not sponsored by
it's
Tesla,
not.
are we? Can I just check? No, we're not.
No.
We're not. But if you look at their investment up front in the charging infrastructure, superchargers, and look at how they're evolving very much into an energy company, you can see how the business model they're developing isn't just about selling cars and having a sales margin or finance commission or so on and so forth. It's about having an holistic business model. To answer your question, well, I hope I'm going to answer it. What do we need? Well, we need a proper runway of certainty, and certainly investors do, which minimal is 3 years, better
Mm,
still 5, maybe even 7. And what I mean by that is that there is legislation, particularly from government, that says this is the plan, this is what we'll support. We won't change our mind next week because something got difficult. And so they can give the investors and the entrepreneurs and other people a sense of confidence that if they make a business model, if they make a plan, and it is 3, 5, or 7 years, they've got a much better chance of getting a return on their investment rather than being in the middle of nowhere with millions or billions of dollars of investment.
that is really very helpful. I mean, and very, should I say, crystal clear, Roger, because you're right. You're starting from the very beginning, where if it's within the legislation and the investors and the company execs will be seeing that, okay, it's fully supported. So let's have a strategic roadmap of a change or a transition or a
Yes.
development in business modeling, then it will be worth our while. And the time, resources, monetary investment and capital investment that we're going to be pouring in onto this change would eventually give us the ROI in the end. Particularly, I think 2 weeks ago, reading the update about, because you mentioned earlier on the three key components, you talked about data. And I suddenly remembered with the whole boom of AI right now and what Uber is doing to invest on Rivian so that they can have their autonomous cars as well to be the next Uber of the next generation that will rival directly with what's happening right now in San Francisco and Vegas when it comes to autonomous cars as well. I think that is one clear example of a real life change in mindset from a manufacturer's point of view, like Rivian seeking support for investors and Uber being able to take that huge risk and leap of investing billions for data so that Rivian can come up with products that they can eventually use for them. The other challenge there is that if Uber would be investing, the question now would be what will happen to the human Uber drivers who are actually benefiting from the current business model of that company or brand. However, I'm sure that the roadmap when it comes to the strategy for that business transition, I hope they're already thinking about it. But I think for me, when you mentioned about that direction, it suddenly occurred to me that, oh, that's one clear case study of what other OEMs, manufacturers, capitalists, and how that links to legislation can also be hopefully embraced by other industry players and investors in various fields. What's your
Yeah.
take on that? Yeah, or do you have an opinion on that?
Well, yeah, I do. Look, there was an entrepreneur who I got to know in 2007 called Shai Agassi. Shai set up a company called Better Place. It was all about battery swap. And his mantra is he used this term many, many times was to wean the world off of oil. Now, as I said right at the beginning, we're never going to do that because there are a lot of oil derivative products that have nothing to do with moving things. I think it's important people understand that. And I'm not saying that because I do work with EVIS, which is based in Abu Dhabi, Gulf state. I'm absolutely not. I'm fiercely independent. I'm fiercely, well, quite frankly, opinionated on things. Great believer in progressing and developing all the right solutions and especially renewable energy. And I don't see that that necessarily conflicts with being in and around companies that built their wealth on the oil industry. I don't, especially the Gulf states and particularly Abu Dhabi, which I only know best of all, so I can't speak for the others, who can see what's around the corner, have the vision to understand, just like Sheikh Yamani said back in the 70s, that the Stone Age didn't end because they ran out of stones. The fact that it takes weeks and weeks to ship oil from the Gulf to Australia or Asia or anywhere else, when in fact it only takes 9 minutes for solar energy to come from the sun and travel all of that distance and arrive on a solar panel, 9 minutes versus weeks and weeks and weeks. I mean, go figure. And that point about, you mentioned all of the billions, and there have been billions, multiples of billions invested in autonomous vehicles. And we are progressing. We see that with Waymo and other companies. But I sometimes think, what if we'd spent that money, that same money, even half of that money on charging infrastructure? I can remember Shai back in 2007 and 8, when I got to know him first of all, actually put together a plan that said, this is how much it would cost to build battery switch stations all over America. He was based in America. He's working out of America. And I can't recall the exact figure, but even if it was 5 billion, 10 billion, even 20 billion, if that money had been spent, and if you'd been able to have vehicles with swappable batteries, because that was the other part of the equation that was a challenge at the time, there really weren't any, that we could have gone in on a significantly different direction. We're seeing that in China now, by the way. We're seeing that battery swap, not just with NIO, but with Geely, even CATL, the company that make batteries, really championing that solution of swapping batteries. Not because it's quicker, it is. It's more about the reality of how do you scale up and concurrently charge lots of vehicles at the same time out of a grid that isn't necessarily built to be capable to deliver hundreds and thousands of megawatt charging events at a similar time. I was talking to somebody about it just the other day, actually, from Octopus Energy, who's working with CATL, and they really explained it to me so well. I hadn't really properly thought about it, even though I advocate for it. And we maybe talk about wireless charging as well. So the reason why I love being at EVIS is because it's got innovation in the name. And you asked me right at the beginning, where are we? If I had to say on a scale of 1 to 10, if 10 is the ultimate electric vehicle and infrastructure and everything works, I think we're probably on about 6. And to
Mm.
get to 10, I think we've got another 10 or 15, maybe even 20 years. And the 6 to 10 will be better batteries, cheaper batteries, better charging infrastructure, autonomous vehicles. I think those things make up that journey over the next 5 to 10 to 15, 20 years. I
We'll hope
truly believe in that.
we'll hopefully get there, Roger, and hopefully in our lifetime we'll still be able to witness how we get to that 10. But piggybacking off of what you've mentioned about charging, because it seems very basic, but it is the fundamental piece that's really very important for us to be able to go to level 10, right? You've mentioned something about it becoming a potential trust problem, or it is still a friction point for many of the users. So when it comes to the strategies that were implemented before or the strategies ahead when it comes to charging in general, what are we underestimating here? What are the reliability realities that were not taken into account before that will hopefully lead to a it just works properly experience? You've talked about different approaches when it comes to charging. Should it be the mix of the wire, the wireless, and other models eventually that will be also developed over time? What are we missing here?
Well, that period of time in the future I just sort of alluded to, I think that's where we see other technologies arrive. There's no silver bullet. I think it will be a mixture of wireless charging, battery swapping, and cable charging. Which one works best? Well, the one that's most economically viable and does the job. It must be 11 years ago now. Elon Musk was opening a Tesla store in London, and I was in the audience with lots of other people. It wasn't just me and Elon Musk, but I got the chance to ask him a question. And I said, Elon, out of wireless charging, battery swapping, and cable charging, what did he think the journey would be? And would one of those ultimately prevail? Now, bear in mind, this is over a decade ago. And he said cable charging, fast cable charging, because wireless charging was inefficient and challenging to get alignment, and that battery swapping might work, and they'd engineered it onto the Model S. But he said, unless there's a demand for it, then no. So predominantly cable charging. It was an honest answer. He was polite in explaining it nice and succinctly, but we've moved on 11 years. And I think the realization, particularly for autonomous vehicles, is that, yeah, you can have robot arm charging, you can have manual intervention charging, you can whatever. But the whole point of autonomous vehicles is to take away the friction, is to take
Mhm.
away costs, is to make it as seamless as possible. And wireless charging would be particularly elegant for that. You could argue so would battery swap, to be frank. But this is a question of finessing the business model as much as the technology. I sometimes think, and I hope, well, we can make sure we do this, that when we leave this America running, we talk about both those things.
So with that, Roger, it's really very helpful to understand the basic fundamental of the different opportunities within charging that
Mm.
is yet to be developed, but also at the same time, alluding to your point earlier, not only on profitability, but also on policy and standards and legislation that will be, I would call it the enablement layer. Because if the government, for example, would not be supportive of what the private sector would be doing, then we will always go back to the chicken and egg scenario, right? So if you could give one policy recommendation, just put it bluntly, to accelerate the execution without necessarily distorting the markets, just to at least achieve the fundamentals within the context of charging infrastructure adoption and for business models to make sense, what would your policy recommendation be?
Okay, this is going to sound maybe left field or disconnected from your question. But actually, I go further back into the story, which is around critical minerals and the ability to make batteries. At the moment, that is not an international story. It is an Asian story
Mm,
because Japan initially, closely followed by Korea, and then very much learnt at scale by the Chinese. The battery is at the core of where we are with everything to do with the electric vehicle, including charging. Because if you think about it, if you have battery swap capability, that's inherent in who's made the batteries and who's going to put the batteries in whatever given vehicle. If in some way, the better the battery, the less we're reliant on charging. I think I said right near the beginning, initially the adoption phase was people were terrified occasionally. The initial EVs were like 100-mile range, 160 kilometers. So for a lot of people, that just didn't work. Or if it did, you were just full of range anxiety. As we've seen that improve along the way, and people certainly get to hear stories, people who've got vehicles tell people, then the charging proposition becomes not less of an issue, but people are more comfortable with it because they can go on longer journeys without having to charge anywhere other than back at home. But then you've got the people who can't charge at home, because if there's one big thing about the electric vehicle story so far that I think is really important, is that it's not been a socially democratic revolution. The electric vehicle proposition around the world has predominantly been for certain stratas of society who can afford to buy new cars, and that's always the minority of people. People who own homes with drives, nice gardens, nice drives, all of this. And to truly deliver the electric revolution that we all want to see, it has to be something that is affordable one way or another for everybody. Because if it isn't, then it's socially divisive. And if there's one thing the combustion car has been brilliant at doing, it's been in liberating people, giving them social freedom, the ability to travel for work, the ability for recreation, for lots of things. If we cannot bring that to the masses, then it won't work. Now, part of this might be, I think will be actually, the arrival of ubiquitous, relatively inexpensive, autonomous vehicles. But we'll see, because again, as you said yourself, there's been so much money poured into that, but we haven't really seen any sort of significant results so far. There hasn't been a breakthrough, not really.
Yeah, that's a great point, Roger, about being able to make it functional for everyone, regardless of where you are social class wise, which
Yeah.
I think is the reason why cars in general over the last, 50 to 100 years had become something that is essential for everyone and can be used by anyone and everyone, regardless of your household income. And I think the path towards that shift or transition within the context of EV, we still have a long way to go, but I am hopeful and I am optimistic that there are paths that we are seeing right now that are hopefully leading to that direction. To end our note in this more positive conversation, I want to hear your thoughts. What paths do we see that are leading positively to that more hopeful direction?
Well, I really should have caveated what I said a moment ago with the fact that we have seen a fantastic electric vehicle revolution, an adoption of two-wheeled electric vehicles, electric bikes, electric scooters,
Mm,
electric motorbikes, particularly across huge swathes of the Asian continent. We have seen that really liberate people, where they can take the battery off, take it to their home, charge it in their home, or they have things like Go-Go-Row, the swappable batteries. So to be fair and equitable in all of this story, I think we've seen a significant and a very successful revolution in two-wheeled electric vehicles. It's just not been in cars, vans, buses, trucks, but it's coming. To the point of what we're going to talk about, and I think what the landscape and the situation is going to be like in the United States towards the end of the year to November, is I'm very bullish on the adoption of electric commercial fleets. Buses, vans, trucks. You've mentioned some of the companies that build them, Rivian, for example, and others, and some of the huge fleets like Amazon and FedEx and UPS. All these people have huge, fossil fuel bills to run their fleets. When they see and can have access to the vehicles that can significantly reduce that operating expense, that OPEX, and as the CAPEX, the capital expenditure, the cost of those EVs comes down, pretty quickly you get to scenarios where within 2 or 3 years, you're at break even or better. And then it's not a question of even needing legislation. It's simple economics drives it. I mean, ironically, there's the word eco, which is of course short for ecological, eco in economics. I think those two things, when they marry, when they fit, when the ecological factor, environment, climate change, connects with the economic factor, that's when we're all pushing on an open door for change, because it will just happen. Yeah, because look, money makes the world go round. We shouldn't be fearful of that reality. We should work with that reality. And I think it's the people, innovation and entrepreneur and other people involved in this, it's our job to make that happen, rather than just try to say to people, do the right thing, be a good person, do this, do that. People would love to do that, but they have bills to pay, they have families to feed, they have a job to keep. So for it to be mass adoption of electric vehicles, it's simply got to be better for everyone. And right now, it isn't.
I think, Roger, this is the perfect ending to this. I would say, with your permission, part one to this conversation,
Okay.
because I would really want to dig deeper into what you've mentioned about the commercial fleets, because it's also
Yes.
what we are experiencing right now, honestly. With the rising costs of fuel and gas, we're seeing these companies are going to impose certain surcharges or extra fees that will be passed on to consumers. Imagine a world where there is an option of either or. We're not saying that one is the enemy of the other, but there is an alternative which will result to better efficiency, better P&L for these companies, because you've mentioned OPEX and CAPEX, that will be good for everyone, for all the household, or for all regular consumers, just like you and me. So we will definitely do that as a part two of our podcast. But alluding to what Roger has mentioned, we would want to invite everyone to take part, be a part of this event that we are building and will be staging in Toledo, Ohio in November. If you are interested to become a sponsor, an exhibitor, a speaker, a partner, or an attendee, simply go to our website that we'll be linking onto the description and show notes, and will be available across all our socials. You will meet me and Roger in that event in Toledo, Ohio. So, Roger, any parting words for those people who are probably thinking, should I be attending? Should I be following this platform? What are you going to be inviting them on and telling them?
I would say to them, if they want to know what the future is going to look like, come to see us, come to the Innovation Summit. The clue's in the title there. The future doesn't just happen. It gets imagined and delivered by people. That's how the future works, not a predefined destiny. It's something that's created by people in business, people in government. It's created by young people's imagination who come up with fresh and new ideas. And it's created primarily by people working together. And an acronym I'm very fond of is TEAM. Together, everyone achieves more. And together, everyone at EVIS, that's what we can achieve. We can achieve more progress, more confidence, and more, the key word above everything else, more hope for the future.
I'm very much with you there, Roger. Again, thank you so much for sharing all your insights, your knowledge, your expertise. And we look forward to another podcast episode with you. And we'll be seeing you in November. Thank you so much,
I'm looking
Roger.
forward to it, Joseph. Likewise. See you soon. Thank you.